an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Young Wizards, Wizards at War. Chapters 5 and half of Chapter 6, Target of Opportunity and Collateral Damage. In these chapters, we get to visit Roshaun's family and see exactly what kind of pressures he's living under. And it's enlightening. Also, we see what Skerrit's relationship with his dad is like. Well, dad-ish, is that the right word? It's rough. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Patricia for commissioning this episode. So, Chapter 5 is unexpected. I don't know why. I knew that Dairine was going with Roshaun to where he lived. I knew that his father had abdicated and made him king. And yet, I wasn't expecting to actually meet them. I don't know why. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I guess I thought whatever was going to go on would be Roshaun dealing with it on his own. And Dairine would somehow have to hang back or just be, I don't know. And the whole meeting with all of them is so, it's framed really weirdly, because what you would think if you were told Dairine is going to Roshaun's planet, she's going to meet his family, she's going to be seen by his people. That's the order you would expect, I think, right? You would expect she would be introduced to his family first, they would have a talk, and then he would step outside and greet everybody and make himself known to them. Instead, she is shown to his people and he presents himself before he goes in and sees his father. And there is a moment where he is about to leave and his mother walks in. He isn't going to find her and doesn't seem to even expect to see her, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's not that she has never come up and we know that she's not dead or anything, but she just doesn't really seem to be a factor for him. And her turning up the way she does seems to surprise him or catch him a little off guard. And she isn't there for the conversation between him and his dad. And I kind of wondered about that. It's almost treated like she doesn't get to ask questions about what the two of them talked about, or she isn't supposed to be involved. And I'm not really sure why that is. Is she a wizard? Actually, I'm not sure. I think she is, right? Because I'm pretty sure Dairine says something about you're lucky both your parents are wizards. So I think she is. But regardless, the whole tone of everything, the order that it happens in, the way everybody reacts, it all feels just a little bit off in a way that I think is very deliberate and very effective. You feel completely unnerved by everything, And it really gets the tone is set early when they arrive and Roshaun is obviously really concerned about presentation. It turns out his family is pretty formal. And I don't just mean the way they dress, but the way that they seem to interact with one another. His mother slightly less so, but it's really only less so in comparison to the way he and his father are with each other. It's still pretty formal, in the scheme of things. So he's got a real case of the nerves. Later on, he holds Dairine's hand for a second and she feels his hand sweating. And that's a real giveaway for me. I am a nervous sweater. I don't sweat that, like, when I exercise, of course I sweat, but I'm not an excessive sweater. And I don't even have to wear deodorant and stuff because I don't sweat under my arms at all. I sweat on my face and I sweat on my back, which is weird. But when I get really nervous, sweat will just pour off me and I will be ice cold. So it's a really terrible combination. I'm so clammy and gross. So when she touches his hand and feels him sweating, I was just like, oh man, I feel a lot of sympathy for you, man, because that's such an annoying thing to have happen. And it just happens that a lot of the times when we're nervous, it's during moments where things are formal. And for a woman, if you sweat a lot, but you're dressed formally, it can fuck with your clothes. And for me, if I'm in heels, my feet will sweat and I will slide forward on my heels and just it'll make my shoes totally uncomfortable, unwearable almost, you know? But yeah, the whole moment where he asks her to change her clothes, it's kind of funny to me actually, because she almost takes offense to it that he asks her to. And this is one of those moments where I truly don't resonate with Dairine at all. Dairine, sweetie, what do you think you should wear to officially greet a king and queen whose son has consistently dressed like that? Why did you not expect to have to change your clothes? I'm truly mystified by this. What? She puts up a fight about it, and I don't get it. Of course, it's just a mark of respect. You know, it's not even if you were going to meet somebody's parents for the very first time in general, you would usually want to make a good impression. Now, granted, you know, if you're in high school and you're just meeting your friend's parents, it's not the same thing as meeting your boyfriend's parents for the first time. But this is a literal king and queen. I mean, even if it weren't, I would still want her to care a little bit more. But it is. It's actual royalty. And you have seen the way he dresses. And like it or not, the way you dress matters. It gives people a signal of how to treat you. And again, we don't like it, but that's how it works. It's just how it works. So it's wild to me that she's so taken off guard by his request and then digs her heels in the way that she does. And eventually, when she changes, it's a really cool gown, and she actually is sort of enjoying herself, except for the tiara, which she does like, but it's just sort of inconvenient. I'm extremely curious about that. For my bridal party, I went on AliExpress and I bought a bunch of tiaras in different styles and colors for all of my bridesmaids. Each bridesmaid's getting 2 tiaras. It's truly, there's no reason for that, but I couldn't resist some of them. They were really cheap and they were so pretty. And I keep wondering, how am I going to get this to stay on my head? It's just going to have to be a ton of pins, I assume. But anyway, yeah, that winds up influencing how much Dairine bows and whatnot, because she's afraid it's just going to slide right off her head. I'm sorry if you guys can hear a literal chainsaw. Somebody's doing something in the yard next door. So what she's put in the clothing is this resplendent grass green gown, and Roshaun seems actually to be pretty impressed by it. There's a real sense here between the two of them that there's clearly an attraction that Dairine seems less willing to acknowledge than Roshaun does. He seems to sort of take his cue from her, and the fact that she doesn't seem interested in naming what's going on between them, he decides to sort of step back from it and not pursue it or address it. But it seems clear to me that he is interested. And even like when he's undressing, she's looking at his chest when he like takes his shirt off, and she's like, all right, what's up? But that's as far, like, her mind immediately switches away from it. And there's no moment of wondering about him. There's no real, like, oh, her cheeks grew flushed, you know. When we were in Nita's perspective and she was hanging out with Ronan, it was really clear that she was extremely conscious of herself and of him all the time. And when we're in Dairine's head, it doesn't feel like that, which is kind of weird because I do think she's interested. It's just not at the foremost of her mind at all. I don't know. It just surprises me a little bit, I guess. So this is the whole thing here. I'm just going to read this because I feel like for some reason this moment truly makes me understand Roshaun's attitude a little bit better. Before that, though, I forgot that there's this conversation that she has with Spot, which is sort of interesting. She asks him, Spot, because Roshaun's out of the room, I think, for a second, how he's feeling. And he says, peculiar. I'm not losing my mind, but then again, I haven't felt any of these strange fugues you tell me I'm experiencing either. And he says, when she says, in the old days, we wouldn't have had these problems. These are not the old days, Spot said. You are no longer half human, half manual. I am no longer just a machine with manual access. Both of us have become something more and less, and the new increased power levels do not make us who we were again. They only make us more powerful versions of who we are now. All right, Spot, listen. You don't have to fucking shoot me in the chest like that, okay? I didn't need this today. I swear to God, guys, I'm realizing so much of what I have been going through the past, like, probably 2 years or so, in terms of struggling with aging, struggling with weight gain. It's grief. I am grieving a version of myself that is gone. And that's not to say that, like, I could lose weight, allegedly. I'm not sure how much I buy that, but let's say I could. Even if I did, that would not make me who I was in my mind when I look back at who I was. And I can get all sorts of things done to my face. That is not going to make me look how I used to look. It is going to make me look like a woman who is my age, who has had things done to her face. That's not to say it would be bad, but I am not going to get back what I had. That isn't possible. And I have been desperately clawing to get that back. And I realized the other day, I have spent the last 3 or 4 years doing that, focusing on trying to get back something that is unget-backable. You change. It's inevitable. And there is no more sure way to guarantee your own unhappiness than to try and get something back that is gone, or focus on a reality that you wish was true that is not actually true. It's just like, that is like the whole principle behind Buddhism, right? Is like attachment is suffering. And if you are always reaching back or looking back, I wish I looked like, I wish I still had, I wish I was like, you are never going to feel at peace or content in the present, because the present is like completely irrelevant to your mindset, and you don't want the present to be what it is. So when you engage with the present, you're engaging with it on a level that is rejection, that you are trying to escape from it while you're engaging with it, which causes this weird sort of cognitive dissonance, which makes you deeply unhappy. And it's wild to me that I never put it together, that has been what's going on, is grief. I've lost something. I've lost a version of myself. And this is just going to keep happening. You know, like as you age, there are going to be versions of you that you will have sort of imprinted in your mind as like, oh, that's me. And then time will pass and you'll look in the mirror and you'll realize that version you have in your head is not you anymore. And that's just inevitable. The version of yourself in your mind is literally never really going to match up with what you see in the mirror or how other people perceive you. But that doesn't stop us, does it? From wanting to be a certain thing, wishing that we could go back to something. And with Dairine, it's really interesting to me because Dairine, it's having had this insane power. Even Nita and Kit did not have the kind of power Dairine did because they didn't become wizards until they were older than Dairine was when she came into her power. So Kit and Nita don't really have the kind of experience with this particular sort of loss that Dairine has. She is in a different class. And as somebody, and this is like, I just really want to emphasize here, guys, that I am trying to acknowledge a reality here. And I may come off as sounding really conceited, but I'm just going to tell it like I feel it was. When I was younger and more slender, I was exceptionally attractive. And that kind of appearance comes with power. It's just, they go hand in hand. It's pretty privilege. If you look a certain way, a lot of things in your life are going to be easier for you. And you won't notice. That's the point of privilege, right? Is that it just happens for you and you don't quite realize it's not like this for everyone. And then if it begins to go away, and that's sort of what's interesting about pretty privilege and thin privilege, is that it can. You know, white privilege, you're white and that's it. Like you can't get away from that. That's just with you forever. If you're straight, that's a privilege that will never go away. But pretty privilege goes away. And thin privilege can go away if you gain weight. And so you begin to have this moment of realizing like you didn't understand how good you had it for a little while. And that's part of what you're desperate to get back as well. It's not just, I want to look a certain way because I want to look that way. It's also, I want the world to treat me the way that it used to treat me when I looked this way. So in a sense, I like really understand Dairine's frustration of I had a power that I don't have access to anymore and I will never have it again. Even if I were to like, you know, lose 150 pounds and get in amazing shape, I would still be pushing 40. It's just never going to be that again. And I really loved this moment where she's talking to Spa about this and she thinks about, let's see, because it said so well here. Here it is. Nothing now was as easy as it had been in the beginning. Knowing that this was the fate of wizards everywhere didn't make it any easier. I thought I wasn't wizards everywhere. I thought I was different. Exactly. Don't we all? When I was young, I thought I would just take good enough care of myself that I would age gracefully and that once aging began to catch up with me, I would be ready for it. That I would be transitioning into that portion of my life with the awareness that it was something new and I would still be above average for my age in terms of appearance. I really thought that there was a way to sort of like fight it or that I mentally would have accepted it and have come to terms with it by the time it happened to me. And that's not how it works. You still mentally feel like a certain age in a lot of ways. And the aging that happens externally, it creeps up on you and is very surprising. And you don't notice it until you see like photos of yourself. So the whole idea that I'm an exception and that, yeah, this happens to everybody, but that doesn't make me feel any better. Oh man. Yeah. 100%. And it's just, I really, this moment just fucking spoke to me because I've only in the past couple of weeks begun to really, truly realize this is a source of a great deal of pain and self-loathing for me and frustration. And that it's all due to trying to like get something back and grieving over a loss and not even wanting to admit it's a loss because I still have it in my head. It can be got back. So like I have to, it's like acknowledging that somebody has died, you know, and it's not like, I don't want to be over dramatic about it, but there is a part of you that when you get to a certain age, you feel so disconnected from your younger self that they might as well have been a different person. And so letting go of that, it should feel more natural, but it's just so hard to do. And I really just loved this whole section. And I love how we keep returning to Dairine struggling with this, because I think she is so particularly arrogant, you know, in a way that I relate to, honestly. And she has so much of her identity wrapped up in her abilities, you know, and that's the thing. Like mine was very wrapped up in my appearance. I didn't even quite realize that. You don't until things start to slip away. And so once her power begins to fade, she just doesn't really seem to know who she is anymore. You know, she thought she would be the OP one that people would always come to when they needed a real boost. And now she has to like collab with folks. And what? I need to ask for help? Like, what the fuck? I can't imagine, you know, especially you're dealing with fucking magic. Like, how much harder is it to lose something like that? A connection to like the powers and the fundamentals of like creation in the universe. And you had this intrinsic bond that begins to just weaken. Oh, that must be agony. So yeah, this whole bit I just really liked. And I really like Spot having to be like, girl, you need to fucking get real here. You're not getting that back. You got to stop and stop pretending that you're concerned about like, because she keeps on acting like she's worried about the little fugues he's having because she's concerned about his functionality. And Spot sort of gets to the heart of things and is like, you're concerned that like my functionality is going down and that is an effect on you somehow, that's going to be a change again for you. But you haven't even dealt with the changes that have already happened to you. So you don't need to be looking for extra shit to worry about right now because you need to come to terms in general. Anyway, so this is when he comes back in and he's got this fucking ridiculous like gold outfit on. And she asks why it's always gold. And he says, it's life's color. In this way, we do life honor. What about you? And she says, what about me? And this is the whole thing. So eventually, because she tries to be like, all right, I'll put a spell over myself and make it look like I'm wearing a nice outfit. And he's like, my dad will be able to see right through that. You need to actually wear something. So let's see. I'm trying to find the actual description of it because I really enjoyed it. Oh, here it is. This doesn't look promising, Dairine said under her breath. Hurry, said Roshaun. The tension in his voice cut short all the acid retorts Dairine could have deployed. She turned her back on the closet. Spot, close that. Do we have a routine for making clothes? Searching. Found. And she ends up getting this like dress made on her body and has a moment of feeling really suddenly self-conscious because she doesn't know how much Roshaun can see of her body while the clothing is transforming. She doesn't know if this planet has a problem with nudity, so she doesn't know whether he's going to be scandalized. She feels embarrassed, and that's really all that she's truly concerned about, but she doesn't know how he would even perceive it. And she has an urge to cover herself up, but then realizes if I move, I could fuck the whole like outfit up. It's forming around me based on like my coordinates in space. And if I change that, then the dress will be like coming out of my body in places, which will be very bad. She was wearing a simple scoop-necked, short-sleeved, floor-length dress in a velvety substance as green as grass and as light as fog. Around her left wrist, where her watch usually went, was a bracelet of emeralds the size of quail's eggs, held together with nothing but a series of characters in the speech, a delicate chain of symbols and softly burning green smoke, scrolling through the gems as she watched. Another chain just like it held a single similar stone at her throat. And honestly, this sounds so rad. I would love to be able to just make clothes around myself. Oh, if I could make clothes and I could like do my makeup and hair with magic, I think that's where the primary amount of my energy would be going every day. Because I want to care more these days than I do. I'm not willing to put forth the effort to even wash my fucking face sometimes. That's how like bored of it I am. But if I could just like have the speech give me my air dried curly hair and I don't have to actually shower and wait for it to air dry for 4 hours, how great would that be? If I could just have my dress laundered and ironed and on my body and I don't have to actually go through the laundering and ironing. Oh my God. Are you kidding? Like, ugh, how did we not know this was a thing already? So she asks him what he thinks, and he's like, oh, that actually looks a lot like our clothing. Where's that from? And she says, possibly Oz, and he doesn't get the reference at all. Of course he wouldn't. So they headed towards the crystalline doors, Spot spidering along behind them. Out beyond the doors lay a goldstone terrace with a broad stone railing, and beyond that a huge formal garden full of red and golden flowers and plants. Past the garden, the surface of the sun's side of Welleck spread, miles and miles of unrelieved flatness, reaching straight to the horizon on every side. Just in the doorway, before stepping out onto the terrace, Roshaun suddenly paused. He stood there for some seconds, simply looking at the setting sun, straight at it, blinding as it was, and dropped his gaze. This is not good, Roshaun said softly. Still, let us go. They walked through the doors and out across the terrace, and as they did, Dairine thought she saw something stirring out there, a waving movement. Her first thought was that she was seeing the motion of wind in the garden plants. But there isn't any wind, she thought. Is there a... She froze. There were people out there, about 1 million of them. 2,608,424, said Spot silently. Roshaun walked up to the railing and just stood there, resting his hands on the broad rail. As he came to where everyone could see him, a sound started to go up from the crowd nearest the balustrade and rolled back across it like a wave. A murmur of comment, curiosity, and straightforward hostility. These people wanted to see Roshaun, but not because they liked him. The murmur sounded to Dairine like the thoughtful sound an animal makes deep in its throat when it sees something it considers a threat, an utterance just short of a growl. Roshaun simply stood there with his head up and let it wash over him. The sound got not necessarily more angry, but more pronounced. Roshaun moved not a muscle, said nothing. Very slowly the murmur began to die away again. Only when the crowd was quiet did Roshaun move at all, to look over his shoulder. And he tells her to come forward, because she's sort of like hiding, understandably, and he's like, they can see you, you may as well just, own it. And Dairine, understandably, is like, the energy coming off of these people, not super interested in being the target of that, but I guess. So, as she comes out, this silence completely covers this, and everybody goes really still. The pressure of all those eyes was nearly unbearable. The faces closest to the two of them wore a look very like Roshaun's normal one, proud, aloof, very reserved. They were all as tall as he was, or taller, which made Dairine feel, if possible, even smaller than usual. And the expression in the eyes of the closest people held a hostility of a different kind than what they'd turned on Roshaun. Alien, it said. Stranger. Not like us. What is that doing here? And this is, for me, kind of eye-opening regarding his personality. You know, I've been struggling a lot with the fact that clearly we're supposed to like Roshaun better than we did in the last book because of what he did for their planet. For any planet surrounding the sun, basically. And I never warmed up to him. I just always feel like he's such a dick that, sure, he did something heroic, but that doesn't mean he's like a nice guy. You know, he might be a good guy, but those aren't the same thing. And I wouldn't mind him learning to have a little bit less of an attitude. He does seem to be softened in this book, I'll say that. His overall attitude is generally less antagonistic and outright rude. But there's no real indicator that he, like, knows the way he was behaving before was offensive. It's just sort of comes across more like the author decided to try and soften the way that she wrote him, rather than it's being an actual change in his, like, approach and personality. So this, like, this moment for me, and the realization, because he's mentioned it before, how his people depend on him and other wizards and his family to save them if something else goes wrong on the planet, but also resent him and his family and have tried to kill his father and other family members before. And what I find, this is something that's a phenomenon that I have heard about before. And if you have read the Broken Earth series, this is a really prevalent theme in those books. Highly recommended by N.K. Jemisin, but just be ready for a fucking downer, because they are very depressing. They're excellent, but wow, what a drag. The concept of a race of people who are given extraordinary abilities and thus can save or serve humanity at large. And you would think they would be revered for this. But instead, the resentment toward them for the very thing that they are also sort of valued for kind of perverts this perception of them into a weird simultaneous demand and rejection. And it's a really, like, it's a bizarre thing that feels very true to me, even though I can't say that I have seen a specific example of this that I can call to mind really easily. The best example that I can give, and I say this because in Broken Earth, it's very clear that a lot of the analogy in there is about the Black experience in the world, in America probably specifically. And I think that there is a lot of, like, Black culture that white people celebrate and want to be a part of and demand as, like, something to consume. But actual Blackness is not desirable. They want parts. They want it broken down into consumable parts. And there's, like, this implication, low key, of, like, if we could have all of this but get rid of you, we would, you know? And that's the closest I can come to understanding what it's like for him and the weird relationship that he clearly has with his parents. Like, his mother loves him. It's very clear. And she's the one that he's the most affectionate with, and he doesn't seem to, like, he doesn't seem to particularly try to hold back in any way that feels more pronounced than any teenage boy, you know? But there is a sort of distance that must exist between him and everyone else on this planet, both out of the mechanics of how things are set up, but also his safety. And because of him being so removed, it makes a lot of sense to me that he would not know how to relate to people in a regular, ordinary setting. You know, like there can't be any real socialization for him in the position that he's in, where he's sort of boxed away from everyone else. So it makes some sense to me now, especially considering that it's like, you know, there's being sheltered because you're rich and privileged and whatnot. And that comes with its own kind of warping of your personality. But being sheltered and rich and privileged while knowing that everybody on your planet is depending on you and also hates you for it, that's gotta fucking twist your whole head. So while I'm not trying to excuse him, I feel like I really understand him a lot better now. He explained this at the end of the last book when he was telling them about what happened on his planet, but I just didn't get it. And being here and seeing the way it is, I feel like, oh God, okay, this is like so much more in your face. And I just never thought that Dairine was going to get to see his people and see the way that they respond to him. And I think this is a brilliant move, you know, on her part, the author, I mean, to show what the crowd, how they react, because it could be very easy to have like a moment with him meeting commoners, you know, in the throne room one at a time. And some people have like an attitude problem with him, but you wouldn't really want to believe everybody was like that. This moment and seeing the way this reaction to him just like carries through the crowd, and that it doesn't take anything on his part to cause that reaction. He doesn't say anything. He's not standing up there giving a speech and they're reacting to things he says. They are merely reacting to his existence, which is really just so sad, you know? And he is going to be expected, if something goes wrong, to potentially sacrifice his own life on behalf of all these people who low-key wish he was dead. I mean, ouch. You know, like, what the fuck? So, yeah, I just thought this was super effective. I really liked it. And it just made me... I have a little bit more empathy for him now. I don't like him any more than I did, to be honest. But it just makes me go, oh, God. Like, God knows how I would have turned out in this sort of environment, you know? And we find out later that he was sent on excursus because there was an attempt on his life. And he wasn't told that. But his mother was basically trying to get him out of the way because she was worried about his safety. And I don't think that she knew his father was planning on abdicating while he was gone. So it wound up sort of like not really working out the way she intended. But so, okay. We go then to his father, who is sitting on this throne. And it's a really low-key throne. You know, it's not this huge resplendent thing that you would expect based on how incredibly over-the-top everything else is. Like, I just keep picturing Liberace's house, you know? And it's not actually, you know, the throne you would think would be the crowning glory of a home like this. And not so, which I find pretty interesting, actually. I feel like that demonstrates that their position, there's a humility to their position. You know, they know they are serving, despite the trappings of wealth and luxury, that it's like kind of not really about that, I guess. So she sees this dude who looks a lot like Roshaun, His clothes were like Roshaun's, though in a darker shade of red-orange. His red hair was shorter than Roshaun's by a couple of feet, and he wore it tied back so that the angles and planes of a face very much like Roshaun's, sharp and high cheekboned, were made more obvious. His eyes, as emerald as Roshaun's, were more deeply sunken, a little more shadowed by the brows. His face looked both more thoughtful and more dangerous. So he comes over, and I was sort of expecting him to maybe be outright cruel. And he's not. He's just challenging. He constantly pushes back against everything Roshaun says. And it's not even, there's not a sense always of actual disagreement. It seems almost more like he wants Roshaun to defend his position on everything in a way that I can understand a parent feeling like they need to train their child to be able to do this, especially when they're in a leadership position. But also, I could see how incredibly tiresome this would get, And, yeah, so he has some difficulty with the fact that Roshaun is going to bounce again and saddle him with essentially saddle him with the crown temporarily, even though he attempted to give it up, and will be sort of putting his own father back in danger again by doing this. And his dad is like, are you sure? This is actually really similar to the conversation that happens later with Skerrit and his father. Because, and I'm going to call Skerrit's relative his father because it's just easier. But they both are sort of arguing about where their actual responsibility and duty lies. And they each feel like they should be beholden to their planet first. But Roshaun's father feels like he is swayed by the end of this and agrees with Roshaun. Even if he doesn't outright say it, he is willing to accede to Roshaun's judgment on it because Roshaun technically is king now. And even though he himself is the senior wizard on the planet, there's a sense of, well, you've got to do what you think is right and you're old enough to make this choice and I'm going to support you and we'll see what happens kind of thing. And also, this moment kills me. First of all, he implies that Dairine is influencing him to make a choice that he wouldn't make otherwise. Almost like she's whispering in his ear and trying to get him to do something, absolutely just not the case. And then he says something about the fact that you have to understand what this looks like to our people when you show up with her. And where is it that he says, let's see, you arrive for your people's first sight of you as Sun Lord, and what do they also see standing at your side? An alien, garbed in raiment much like that of royalty, wearing some other world's life color, gemmed like a guarantor. The rumors are flying already. Does another world have designs on the rule of ours, either by straightforward conquest or more intimate means? And Dairine, it takes a second, and then she realizes what he's saying, and she's like, holy shit. And this is a moment where even if I were old enough to think about stuff like this, which I seriously am not, I have zero interest in being anybody's queen, especially not his. And then Dairine stopped short as she saw the peculiar look that had appeared on both Roshaun's and Nelead's faces. So I think he had really assumed that was what was going on. And she's so sincere in her protest that he realizes, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought. And he's a little surprised. And I think with Roshaun, it's that he didn't expect her to be quite so vehemently against this. And he says something about when we come back. And later on when she asks him, what was that? You said when we come back. He's like, slip of the tongue. And she's like, was it though? And I'm like, yeah, I feel like he is probably for his planet and for his position at an age where he would be expected to marry soon. And obviously in Dairine's case, that's not how it is at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had an idea how this was going to go, or a hopeful idea, And this is when fucking Spot, if the star stammers, what of it? Lean times of barren hope wait on the composite's daughter, sharpening the edge of life. Spot, what is that? Spot. Just, honestly, I keep saying Spot, but like, it's the powers. Powers. What does that mean? Like, come on. Can you be a little bit more direct here? It would be appreciated. So, at this point, Dairine has to pull out a notebook because apparently she's keeping track of all of this stuff. And Roshaun explains about like the computer aspect of things with her and her manual. And this is when his mother comes in, and he's very warm to his mother, and she's extremely friendly to Dairine in a way that his father just wasn't, you know. And this is when she mentions that there had been another attempt and that it was on his life, which he didn't know about. So let's see. Oh yeah. So he mentions the expansion and she says, go do what you must. Dairine, go well. And let's see. That's pretty much the end of this section. He asks her to keep her emerald because it becomes her, which makes her sort of blush. And his father goes and sort of makes the announcement to his people about that he's going to be sort of retaking his position temporarily while Roshaun goes and handles things. And then we go into chapter 6, where they're in the crossings. And it's just all feeling really, really weird. There are not nearly as many people in the crossings as there should be. And Skerrit is incredibly on edge. And as we find out, it's for a good reason. Skerrit has really good reasons to be worried about what kind of reception he's going to get and how this whole conversation is going to go. So the description of this kiosk is really wild. Let's see. Below the kiosk's translucent surface, in which Skerrit's topmost 2 pairs of legs were partially embedded, several layers of patches of light flowed with characters in the speech. And it's described as looking sort of like a cubicle crossed with a jungle gym, which is really funny. And let's see. Oh yeah, so she says, find what you're looking for? Not yet. He's never this terse. What's going on? Skerrit, are you okay? He sagged a little, not entirely. And she asks if he needs help, and he says, not yet, but thank you. So, oh my God, and we have Paunch insisting that they get something to eat. I love this, like, constant refrain. He even says at one point, like, look at this, you can see my ribs. This has just got such true dog energy. Really, it has pet energy, like a lot. My pets, actually, Arya and Ripley are kind of an anomaly, where it's not like they don't come running when they hear food being poured into their dish, but it's not like they're constantly standing at their dish demanding food. They're not like my other cats have been, where it was just like incessant and they would come and paw at you while you were asleep. But yeah, with Paunch, it's like you've met this dog before, who just always acts as if he's starving to death. It's just, come on. And Kit doesn't want to feed him before he gets to work because he thinks that that'll like sort of weigh him down. Because for humans, if we eat a certain types of food and certain amounts of food, we just begin to shut down, you know? So I understand Kit's thinking on this, but when Paunch replies with, so you're going to deprive me and hope that I'll function better? And I was like, when he puts it like that, it does sound really stupid, Kit. So I'm trying to jump to the part because I only have like 10 minutes left. That's right. I forgot about this part. Other wizards come up to them. And I had totally forgot about this, actually, because there's a one that I think is meant to be American and another guy that is Australian. Ponch came bouncing up to Nita, who reached down to ruffle up his ears. Later, Kit said, "We need to find Ronan and Skerrit and talk to these guys, I think." "You just up from the moon?" said the boy in the school uniform in a broad Australian accent. "The gate there still open?" "It was a few minutes ago," Kit said. "Great," said the boy. "We're heading back." "Where have you been?" Nita said, "if it's not private." The second boy shook his head. "Edge of the local group," he said, "over by IC 1613. That galaxy was always kind of thin and spread out to begin with, but it's a lot thinner now. You know the Catan Empire there? It's going badly. Its systems are being pushed away from each other so fast that the Empire's falling apart. The big crowd of blue-white stars in the middle of that galaxy is being ripped up. The whole thing could turn into a blazar." I don't know what a blazar is. Let me see what Wikipedia has on this. A blazar is an active galactic nucleus with a relativistic jet. A jet composed of ionized matter traveling at nearly the speed of light, directed very nearly towards an observer. Well, that was not enlightening. Sorry, guys. This always happens, though, when I look these things up. They're just like, I may as well not do it. But I can't resist. And I forgot that there is a girl as well who I think is wearing like a kimono. Even if we can't slow down the expansion right away, we should be able to keep the blazar from igniting, the girl said. And Kit says good luck, if there is such a thing, said the girl. Her look was defiant. But we're not waiting to find out. Die. So this is when Ponch is talking about the scent of what it is they're searching for. "I can find the way from here, or at least get us headed in the right direction. How do you want to go?" "Using a fixed gate would be better right now," Ronan said. "Then I can show you the way in my head," Ponch said to Kit. So let's message Skerrit. And Ponch is like, "I can just tell you where he is because I can smell him." And this is when we find the jungle gym cubicle. Skerrit was there, the front half of him reared up off the floor as he worked at one of the subsidiary kiosk columns that made up the body of the structure. The column had extruded a control console covered with patches of embedded light, which Skerrit was tapping at with great speed. 3 of the gathered rear hate were looking over one or another set of his shoulders. And he's just talking about how this is like going to solve a problem that they're having. And I won't get into any of it because this is math that isn't even like, I wouldn't understand it even if it was our type of math, and it doesn't seem like it's like our type of math. But as he's finishing this, he says, "That'll hold you for the next 2 standard periods at least." "Good," said another rear hate voice from behind Skerrit, and now it was Skerrit's turn to freeze. All his eyes held quite still, looking at what he had been keying in. Then, very slowly, one of them curled up and around to look behind him. The station master of the crossings, a rear hate somewhat bigger than Skerrit and of a lighter, more silvery blue shade, poured into the cubicle and arranged himself among and over some of its interlocking rails and bars. "So you've changed your mind. I'm glad you've come to your senses. We need you here." "Unfortunately, you're wrong," Skerrit said. "I haven't changed my mind." "What?" "You need me more where I'm going. I've spent all the time I can here. This fix will deal with the problem at hand, and now we're going to head out." "Are you insane? Look at this place." And Nita looked. She couldn't see anything wrong with it, except that it did seem much emptier than usual. "This is only a symptom," said Skerrit, "of what's coming. And no one with all their brains in place wastes time treating symptoms. A cure's what's needed, and that's what we're dealing with now." "Listen to me, broodling. What's happening out there is far too big for any species to cure. The world is changing, and there's nothing we can do. How do you seriously expect to keep space from expanding? If wizards could have stopped it, they'd have done that already. We just got to teach our mechanisms to handle the new distances and vectors in the long term. Excuse me. Or all this is going to come to a halt, and with it the transport and commerce of 3 galaxies. Your Sibs have better sense. They're not running off on some fool's errand at a critical time. But you've been hard to reason with lately. Something to do with the company you've been keeping. Ooh. Oh, no, you didn't. So, Skerrit basically gets in a shouting match with his dad in front of everybody. And is like, you are trying to bury your fucking head in the sand, and that is not going to do anybody any good. It's not even going to do you any good. And the fact that you're, like, demanding that I do this just shows how little you understand the fucking problem. And he, like, essentially says at the end, you're not going to be welcome back here if you make this choice. That's, like, the implication of what he's saying. And what it comes down to for Skerrit is, like, I'm not going to have any place to worry about coming back to if I don't do this. So fine, you know. And he's turned and swept off down the far side of the concourse. With reluctant backward looks, Skerrit's Sibs went pouring after him. A few seconds later, only Nita, Kit, Philip, Paunch, and Ronan stood there. So what winds up being said a little bit later? First, Nita is like, hey, remember when I told you that you could stay with us? I really meant that. So please feel free. But also, he says, this is all wrong. None of that sounded like something that he would say. Like, he's always been difficult, but it wasn't like that. And I thought what he was getting at here was that his relative had been overshadowed, which I don't know if you can use the term overshadowed for people who aren't wizards. I kind of think that might only be meant to apply to wizards, but that was my thought. And then Kit says, Tom warned us that there would be changes because of the way space was stretching. Ethical changes and personality shifts. And I was like, oh, yeah, he did warn us. I didn't really stop and think about what that would look like. But that sort of, the ambivalence taking over is what is threatening. And that's exactly what this guy was displaying. It's like, well, we just can't do anything about it. So why try? What's the point? You're just wasting your time. You're wasting our time. And that is just such a fucking attitude in the world. So many people are just like, well, the world is just fucked. And it's like, it is, but we can do better. We can. And there's just this sort of like fatalistic, no, we can't. Oh, okay. I guess we just will never try then. Cool. Like, you know, and that I do think is probably the like, you've got people who are actively working for evil, you know, people who are against the rights of certain groups of people. But those folks, I feel like, are in the minority. The ones that cause the most harm are the ones that sort of shrug their shoulders and act like, well, people are garbage. What can you do? You know? So they all climb into this hexagon and gather up together, and Skerrit does the countdown. And the spot where I stopped reading was after the countdown. Her heart was pounding. She glanced over at Kit. 0. Everything went dark. So that was where I stopped. So yeah, this whole thing with Skerrit, I just feel really bad for him. There's like, you know, there's a sense almost like, if we can fix this, maybe his dad will come back to his senses. You know, like, will he realize, like, oh, I was wrong? But the thing that's, if you really want to talk about what it's like in life, you don't really get that kind of satisfying closure, even if it does turn out you were right. The person that you want most to say, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong about all of this, almost never says, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong about all of this. it's like, it's so rare to get that kind of satisfying closure and feel like you've really been acknowledged. And so a part of me is like wanting to believe that it will be undone if they manage to like fix what's going on. But I don't think even if it were, that it would be believable for his ancestor, as he calls him, to suddenly like admit that he was just sort of throwing his hands up and acting helpless in the situation. And obviously Skerrit already felt like there was this kind of like negative attitude about choosing to be a wizard. We know that his ancestor had a problem with it to begin with, but this is a lot more extreme. The implication, the company that you keep. So now it's not even just about Skerrit's choices. It's about like being around other wizards being somehow bad for him, which it truly is like, if you know anything about what the priorities of wizards are, I don't know how you think that, but it's because he's basically like, oh, you're hanging out with a bunch of like commie liberal SJW PC police now, and it's ruined everything, you know? It's very sad. And it's something that I feel like a lot of us have seen in person. It's just like, ugh. So that's the end of that section. So the next episode is going to be next Tuesday, because Yama had double booked by accident and we didn't catch it. So I moved that episode. And so I'll be doing the next section pretty shortly. So thank you again to Patricia for commissioning this. I appreciate you. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.